This is a podcast about our lived experience, which unfortunately includes infant death and subsequent mental health struggles. Please take good care of yourself and only listen if this content feels safe for you right now. We'll still be here when you're ready.
Hi, I'm Judith.
And I'm Alina. We are internet friends turned real-life friends who both experienced the tragic loss of our sons to sudden infant death syndrome in winter of 2021.
In the year after Aiden died, my husband and I both became unemployed. My parents divorced, and we had to move 5 times for various reasons.
And as for me, just a few weeks before my son Quinn died, my then husband had come out to me as a transgender woman, and we're subsequently divorcing.
It's been a lot.
It's been a lot.
But as long as we're living, we will love our sons deeply and work to make sure that we live a life that makes them proud.
Welcome to As Long As I'm Living podcast.
We're so glad you're here.
Hi, everybody. Alina here. This is an episode that is a little bit of a bonus episode. It's something different than our normal fare. So if you've listened to our podcast for a while, you know our stories, Judith and my stories, but we don't really go into much explicit detail about the circumstances of our sons' deaths. And part of that is just because that's not really what we want to be talking about. And part of that is also that we don't want to accidentally trigger people. Because we are aware that unfortunately our lives are extremely tragic and sad. So this episode is specifically the birth story of Charlotte Amelia. Charlotte is the first child, the first daughter of my friend Carol, who is the founder of Empty Arms Bereavement Support in Western Massachusetts. We are releasing a second episode today that is a non-triggering conversation with her about what support groups are, how they help people, how to support people in the early days, and, just more about that organization. So if you do not want to listen to anything that could be potentially triggering, that episode is for you. I will link it in the show notes. You can just go ahead and skip right to that. We will not be offended in any way, shape, or form. All of us, me, Judith, and Carol, we all understand how important it is to protect your mind and your heart and not, take in information that's too much for you to handle. So we're releasing this as a separate episode so that you can opt in to whether or not this is something that you want to hear. That said, I think it's really a beautiful story, and I think some of you will really love listening to it. So if you want, moving forward in this episode, Charlotte's story, this is Charlotte's birth story and some of the aftermath, the immediate aftermath, what it feels like right after you've had a baby die during labor. And without further ado, I will send you into the episode. You can tell us a little bit about your story and your baby. And then we can move into some meaty topics.
I would love to talk some meaty topics with you. So I'm Carol, and I have lots of different hats that I wear. I guess the most important hat that I wear is that I am a mom. That's my favorite hat that I wear. And I am the mom of 5 children. Charlotte is it's funny, she's technically, I guess, my eldest child, but she never grew up, so it always feels funny to say that. She's my firstborn. She was born on May 13th, 2003. Unfortunately, she died. So that was the beginning of my mothering journey. I had 4 more babies who lived, and that was incredible. And yet that's the start of being a mom for me, was having this baby who did not live. And when she was born, I didn't know what it would be like to have a baby. I had wanted to be a mom for my whole life, as far as I can remember. I did have kind of apprehension when I first got pregnant. I got pregnant really quickly, which actually kind of scared me because it felt too good to be true. And she grew well and I was really healthy, and I didn't have any knowledge that in pregnancy, something could go wrong. It felt very Victorian, the idea that a baby could die, during labor. I don't think that was really on my radar at all. So when I went into labor, I remember that so vividly because I was so excited, and it was the middle of the night, and it was, dark. I had a night light, and I got out of bed and my water was breaking. And so my husband was there, he was sleeping, and I didn't wake him up. And I think part of the reason why I didn't wake him up was because it felt like the most delicious thing in the world that I was the only person that knew that I was going to have this baby. When you're so excited, you just have this, you're like bouncing. It was like I didn't weigh anything. I was so thrilled.
I remember when I found out I was pregnant with Quinn, I didn't tell Kaylee was traveling for a work trip. So there was a whole day where I was waiting for her to get home. And so I was the only one who knew in the whole world. And it felt so special.
Amazing feeling. So I called in, and the midwife had said, as long as your fluids are clear and the baby's activity is normal, don't come in. And around 4 a.m, of course, I couldn't go back to sleep. That's such a joke, right? That you're going to be in labor and just go take a little nap. I realized that I had not felt movement in a while. And she said oh, it's not, it's probably nothing. Why don't you just come in and we'll put you on the monitor? And I was scared. And so on the way to the hospital, I can remember thinking I hope there isn't something wrong with the baby. And I look back at that self and I'm like, God, you were such an idiot. What did you think the difference between being fine and what else could be wrong besides dead? That would make you just not move. And so of course, by the time we got there, it was too late. She was already gone. I was already in labor, so there was not any decision making to happen. It was just waiting for her to be born. And I was horrified. I was so horrified and so ashamed. I mean, I think that my first emotions that I experienced when I realized that she died were feelings of embarrassment, shame. I felt like I had let people down, that all of the people in my life that were looking forward to this baby weren't going to get the baby after all. I felt like I'd tricked people into thinking I was going to give them a baby, and then they weren't going to get the baby after all. And something about the fact that I hadn't met her yet, and I had been told that she was gone, right? I totally dissociated from the fact that I still had a baby. And so, at that moment when they said things to me you should invite your family to come and meet her and you'll want to spend time with her, I was you guys are absolutely off your rockers. I have no interest in doing any of those things. I just want to get this baby out of my body, get out of this hospital and be done with this. I imagined that if I distanced myself from her and just got everything over with, that I could just kind of creep home with my head under my wing and somehow just go back to being the person that I was before I ever got pregnant. And I ended up having a really different experience from what I thought I was going to have, because fortunately I did have really supportive care in the hospital. I had healthcare providers that understood what bereaved parents need, and who totally disregarded me saying no, thank you. And we're so let me ask you that question again. So I did end up having, as soon as she was born, I actually feel something shifted in my brain when she was being born. When I felt her shoulders and her head be born, I was oh my God, that's a human body that just came out of me. And that moment that we all have, when we lay eyes on the first baby that our body ever grows, which is oh my God, I cannot believe that I actually just grew a human being. How is that even possible? That was a person kicking me, it's so theoretical when you're pregnant, and there's this just incredible shift that happens in your psyche when you actually see a baby come out of you, where you're I can't believe that that's the thing that brings every one of us onto this planet. It's so mind blowing and so earth shattering. And the explosion of love that you feel is so overpowering that my memories of her being born are not even sad. When she came out, I just was oh my God, I don't think I've ever felt anything like this before in my life. And I don't think I ever will. Like, it was so fantastic. And so, I mean, in that moment, like, there was like no hesitation. Like, I saw her and I just like scooped her up. I was like, I got to have that baby in my arms. And I held her. I didn't even like dress her or wrap her in a blanket. I just like had her on my belly for hours and hours. And my really good nursing care, which was really good. But they said things like, you can have as long as you want with her. And like, what did that mean to me? Right? Like, how much time do you spend with someone who's dead? I didn't know whether that meant like, like, even though she's dead, feel free to take 30 minutes, or whether it meant like, you can spend 2 days together. Like, the 2 days together part, like, certainly didn't cross my mind. But I think because there was no actual like parameters put on what it meant to spend as much time as I wanted. And because I came into that situation with like the same kind of cultural preconceived notions that almost everyone does, which is like, we live in a society where life and death are very separate from each other. And like, where someone dies, we like very quickly hand them over to someone else to take care of them. And, certainly that's not always true, but it is mostly true. And it's certainly true in like the media and the TV and whatever it is that we're looking at. And so, we had been up the whole night the night before, and as like day turned to night and we were exhausted, we decided that we, needed to sleep. And there was no part of me that imagined that it would be possible to both sleep and keep her. And so we decided that it was time to say goodbye. And it was a decision that we like theoretically came to on our own, and we called in the nurse and told her like exactly how we wanted to do it. And she did exactly what we asked her to. And, I think like all parents who have lost a baby, like that moment of like watching her disappear with my baby in her arms. And like, I can still remember like, in the hospital, how there's like a curtain, like between you and the door. Like, I remember seeing her like walk around the curtain and then hearing the door click shut and being like, that's it. Like, I don't have a baby anymore. Like, that was it. That was my, like, everything that I like wanted in life just like disappeared, and like, I might as well just die. And so I did go to sleep, and I woke up in the night. It was the only time ever that I didn't remember what had happened. Like, there was just that one sleep where I went to sleep and didn't remember. And I woke up, and like, as soon as I like woke up and realized what was happening, I had like an enormous, complete like meltdown. I remember just screaming, like yelling for the call button. I like couldn't deal with the fact that I remember thinking like, she's still here in this building somewhere and I'm here. And like, why am I not holding her? Like, why did I say goodbye to her? Like, that was so dumb. I should have stayed up. What kind of a mother am I? But like, I didn't know. And so I like remember calling the nurse and being like, you got to get me sleeping medication. I'm like, never going to be able to sleep again. So they like brought me Ambien, and I went back to sleep. And then I woke up in the morning, and the social worker came in, and I said to her, like, I'm feeling so weird that she's here and I'm up here and we're not together. And I like remember with like every fiber of my being, my like insecure little being that had no idea how things were supposed to be looking. I was like, maybe if I say this, she'll say, we can bring her back. And she said, oh, I'm so sorry. She's actually already been picked up for autopsy. And I was like, oh my God, it's really done. Like, she's gone. And so I didn't ever see her again. And, I'll never know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Like, she did theoretically leave us on our own terms, but it's definitely like informed the way that I teach healthcare providers now, because my care was really good, but there were ways in which things were phrased that like didn't make sense to my brain in that moment.
I know a little bits of your story, but hearing your story now, it makes so much sense to me where you went in your life.
So what happened is I went home, and there were two things that happened when I went home. One was that I was like instantly aware, just kind of like sitting and reeling in the silence of my own home, that if I had not had the healthcare providers that I had, I wouldn't have done all of the things that were like keeping me alive. So like the things that were keeping me alive were like remembering how she felt in my arms and like looking at her pictures and like touching her little lock of hair that they had cut for us and like, you know, looking at her footprints. And I was like, if I had been in charge of this, I would have been too scared to do all of those things. Not because I was afraid of her, but because I would have been always asking, like, are they going to think I'm weird if I do this? Are they going to think I'm like, you know, weird if I hold my dead baby? Are they going to think I'm weird if I take a picture of my dead baby? Like, I knew that I was empowered and enabled to do those things because of the care that I got. And I knew that without those things, I would have just been like, I don't know what would have happened to me. And then the second thing was I was just alone. And I had barely any friends who had experienced even having a baby. I was 26. So hardly anybody that I knew had ever even had a baby, let alone had a baby die. Nobody had a baby die. I didn't even know anyone who had a miscarriage. So I had nobody who could actually like sit with me and have even like a lens. Like the closest I could get was my friend who'd had a baby. So at least she understood like what it feels like to have a baby and could like think like, imagine having that moment of like euphoria and the moment of death happening in the same exact moment. Like that must really fuck with your mind. Sure it does. That's right. And, you know, it was 18 years ago. Google didn't exist yet. I can't even remember what you used. Yahoo, maybe. And like, if you put in like pregnancy loss, there were some like chat rooms and there were some places that were like sort of like message boards where you could like post things, but like they weren't interactive. And it was also like not appealing to me because it was just like a lot of pictures of other people's dead babies, and they were bad pictures because it was 2003 and there's nothing supportive about that. And everything was totally out of context. Like, you know, it's a lot different now than it was 10 years ago. Like we are able to like create relationships online now.
Yeah. Judith and I met on Reddit.
Right. Exactly. But like that relationship of like meeting Judith on Reddit, right, when you met Judith on Reddit last year, is probably different than what if it would have felt like 10 years ago if you had met somebody on Reddit, even though Reddit existed 10 years ago, because we just didn't have as many ways of communicating that were not voice to voice or face to face. And so I was essentially totally isolated. And what's actually pretty fascinating is that when I left the hospital, the social worker said to me, you know, this is really, you're going to have a hard time, and it can be really helpful to have other people to share with. And I'm going to give you the phone number of this woman named somebody, I don't remember her name. And she had her daughter, Liliana, I remember the baby's name, of course, died like 3 years ago, much under the same circumstances as Charlotte. And she, you know, said if anyone ever needed support, that they could call her. And so I went home with this like piece of paper with a phone number on it, and I just couldn't call her. Like, what was I going to say? Like, help me, my baby died. Like, I had no bandwidth to like be able to ask somebody to help me. I could not do it. I was so isolated, and all I wanted was someone to help me, but like I didn't know what to do. And so what did help me was that my best friend from childhood who lived in Georgia had a neighbor who was her friend in Georgia who had lost her first baby to hypoplastic left heart syndrome. I think at the time it was 5 years earlier. And so Kathleen, who is my childhood friend, basically said to me, like, I don't really care how you answer this question, but I'm going to have my friend Carrie call you because I think it would be really good for you to talk to her. And I was like, very, very vulnerable, very good at taking orders. And I was like, okay, have her call me. And so she called me, and I kind of remember, I don't remember what we talked about, but I remember that my takeaway was like, I can tell from what this woman is saying to me that she has spent time like laying face down on the floor for hours at a time, like crying for hours on end, like being unable to figure out how she's going to survive the next 10 minutes. But like, she's actually a functional human being right now. Like she had at that point, she had like a 2-year-old and a baby, and she was, was talking to me about how, she had like a shelf in her living room with like all of Claire's things on it, and how like Claire's pictures were around the house, and how her, daughter who was 2, like knew that Claire was her big sister. And she was describing for me this like life 5 years down the road where like Claire was still her very important daughter, but she had a life that did not involve like, 90% of her day being literally like unable to function.
She gave you like a blueprint for, hope, that's like, it won't be this way forever.
And looking back on it, like what it is it's like you go into this and you have no role model, right? You've never seen anyone do this before. And that's, partially, I think that's in part to the way that we live, which is very separately from one another. We're not in the village anymore, and we don't talk about it. I mean, I just think we have no role models. And so in some ways she was able to kind of just paint this like really vague outline for me of like survival is possible. And I couldn't figure out and this is going to be very familiar kind of line of thinking, I think, for the two of you and anyone who's listening, you can't kind of figure out like, this is a problem that we can't solve. Like we can't fix anything about the thing that is wrong right now. And so given that you can't fix anything about it, and it's never, ever going to get less sad, and I remember thinking like, when I'm 100, am I ever going to think it's not really that sad that baby died? Like, no, I'm always going to think that's sad. So like, ergo, how am I ever going to feel less sad, right? Like you just can't envision how am I going to get myself out of this black hole that I'm in when I can do absolutely nothing about the thing that happened.
How you can learn to walk around the gaping hole.
How do you learn to live with the holes? It's unbelievable.
Hey everybody, Alina again. So at this point in the conversation, we moved out of Carol's personal story and into a more general conversation. And again, as I said in the beginning of this episode, I'm going to link that episode in the show notes. And it'll also be the one that's right after this on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. So please feel free to go ahead and listen to that for more from Carol. And, we appreciate Carol sharing her story, and we hope you guys, I don't want to say enjoyed listening to it because obviously it's very sad, but I think it's really beautiful too. So thank you guys for listening. As always, you can, shoot us an email, or you can shoot Carol an email as well. I'm sure she'd love to hear from you. I'll put her email in the episode description. All right. Bye guys.
To all of our wonderful new friends, we want to hear from you. Email us at aslongasimlivingpodcast@gmail.com and follow us on Instagram at aslongasimlivingpodcast. We'll get back to you as soon as our grieving brains allow. Yay!